as everyone rolls in, and it will take a moment, Charlie, the way Zoom is set up. So folks are going to roll in. So just good morning, Rose. I am just going to kind of say good morning to everyone as they're coming in. Charlie, remind me, what city are you based in?
Minneapolis.
That's right. That's right. How's your weather today?
It's we just got some what they called $1 million rain. It was came at just the right time because we were pretty dry after that winter. Winter was super
Awesome.
warm and dry. And then it's cool. And not cold, but cool. It's 45 degrees, 42 degrees this morning Fahrenheit. So
Midwinter for me. So, good morning, everyone. I am Lisa Schwartz, founder and chief experience officer here at ITSM Academy. And the reason I say that is we are headquartered in beautiful Boca Raton, Florida, where it is a balmy 81 degrees today. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm very grateful that Charlie was able to work this into his schedule. Charlie has all of the all of the fancy backgrounds. He is he provides guidance for Forrester on enterprise architecture. And he is very engaged in the transformation IT operating models, and in particular, the impact of agile, DevOps, and product thinking. He previously led Forrester's DevOps and enterprise service management coverage. But beyond that, Charlie is an old friend of mine, of the academies, and we always learn from him. We always love to hear what Charlie has to say. And Forrester is doing a very cool award program that, frankly, they've been doing since 2010, and I wasn't aware of. So part of why I was very excited to get Charlie here is if you guys aren't aware of this, it's an amazing opportunity for organizations. So that's part of what Charlie's going to talk about today. Oh, and I almost forgot. For those of you new to ITSM Academy, we are celebrating our 20th anniversary. We are, as the name says, we train in all kinds of IT service management, which includes ITIL, Agile, DevOps, value stream mapping, process design, employee experience, and more. And with all that said, Charlie, as you get rolling, I'm going to throw up the poll. We have one poll for you guys. Pretty simple question. If everyone could just jump in and answer that very quickly for us. The question is enterprise architecture still relevant? Uh, Charlie, no surprise here. So far, it is 100% yes.
and
Um, and I'm
I
going to leave
can't
that up.
vote.
You can't vote. I would vote yes, but I can't either. Everyone's rolling in with their answers. It's 100% yes. I'm going to go ahead and end that poll and share the results. The results are 100%. Yay, still relevant, which I think we all knew. So, with that said, Charlie, take it away.
Thank you, Lisa, and thanks so much for having me here today. It is an honor and a pleasure. My topic today will be lessons from the Forrester Enterprise Architecture Awards. I've got kind of a self-branding, self-marketing screen here. I've have been fairly active in the community for a number of years, written books, contributed to COBIT. I was an ITIL reviewer, and worked a lot on the IT for IT standard as well as my personal career. So enough about that, though. Um, the agenda today, we'll talk about the a little bit about Forrester, what we do, why you should care, in case you're not familiar with us. The EA Awards, a little bit of background on that. We're going to talk about last year's winners, and we're going to present a little bit of survey data just as an interlude. I think everybody loves quantitative, crunchy data. And then talk about themes and big ideas that we've gleaned from the awards, not only this year, but in the last few years. And with that, let me just get in. Forrester is a global research and advisory organization. People sometimes will equate us to consulting, but we're not really that. We lead with the research, and the big GSIs in many cases are our clients. So I think I appreciate it when people understand that there's a difference between advisory versus consulting. And the way that the value proposition works is first we do qualitative research, and we have to do qualitative research to then inform your quantitative research, because how do you know what questions to ask if you aren't at least having some conversations about what's important? That leads to being able to tell certain stories, develop certain narratives that customers value. The narratives and our ability to tell the story provides the customers insight into what they're doing and some assurance that they're on the right track. And I'm using assurance in a fairly formal governance sense, and that people do turn to Forrester for that assurance aspect. And those of you with a background in governance know that that's a significant word in that community. And in turn, we get access and feedback on, well, how are we doing in telling the story, which informs our qualitative and quantitative research, and the cycle spins around again. My point of view, our point of view on EA, is informed by the fact that I myself am a practitioner. I served as an architect at a number of large firms. I won't name them, but you can see my LinkedIn profile. We get customer inquiries, but I learn as much from you learn by teaching, and I learn from our inquiries and what people are finding important. We also interview subject matter experts. And that's a really important aspect of it. We get briefings from vendors on their offerings. We run surveys. I myself run the State of Modern Technology Operations survey, which is a considerable honor. Not every analyst gets to coordinate a survey. And also we have the EA Awards, the Enterprise Architecture Awards, now in the 15th year. I have inherited those. We'll talk in depth about those, but that certainly gives us a lot of very, I think, unique insight into what enterprise architecture groups are finding important. And finally, I try to be involved in the community as much as possible. I go to conferences, I talk to thought leaders, and so on and so forth. So all of this merges into our point of view on EA, which I hope is valuable and useful to you. So in 2023, I led the Forrester Enterprise Architecture Awards. This was the first year in which we with the open group. And the form of that partnership, it was co-publicity, co-branding and then the open group also contributed judges. So the judging was by experienced Forrester analysts and by designated very senior architects that were nominated by the open group. And I thought we had just a terrific level of interest and some terrific winners here. In North America, US Bank won, Rockwell and Takeda Pharmaceuticals placed. In EMEA, Schneider won, and InterSwitch placed, and in APAC, Union Bank Philippines won, and Virgin Australia and CLP Power Hong Kong placed. And I'll talk more specifically about these. But last year was I think we had the highest level of participation we've ever seen. We had 29 submissions across the various regions, and the awards were publicized by emails and social media. We are currently collecting submissions for the 2024 awards. If you are interested, you can reach out to me, and I think the awards are publicized in various channels. We're collecting the submissions. They're kept confidential. However, if you do submit, we would like you to cooperate with us in telling the story about why you won. It's kind of the point of the awards. Many people do talk about giving back as one of the reasons that they do the awards. And then we get into the submissions judging. That's going to go into Q3. And then in Q4, the awards will be made at the Forrester events. We have three TNI summits in each of the major regions. The North America Summit starts September 9th. And I don't have the other two just top of mind right now. And we'll have a breakout session this year, and then more detailed presentations at various open group events. So it's a pretty big deal because these have been going on since 2010. They've been led by some very distinguished EA thought leaders at Forrester. They've been in previous years in partnership with various publications. Now the main partnership is with the Open Group, which makes a lot of sense since they are the producers and authors of the Open Group Architecture Framework. The awards questionnaire is structured around what we call the Forrester Outcome-Driven Architecture Model. And I won't spend a lot of time on this. It's fairly abstract, kind of high level concepts linked by some boxes and lines. But basically, we really insist and highly value specific and quantitative submissions. The submissions that says, we achieve lots of synergy through enterprise architecture, that does not score as well as somebody saying, well, enterprise architecture played a leading role in reducing the application portfolio by 20%, which in turn reduced the technology product footprint by 15% and, saved X dollars or allowed the reallocation of Y number of staff. So we're looking for those kinds of real specific business outcomes, but framed in terms of some of the broader concepts here. How can architecture be valuable and agile? How does it work in an increasingly agile world? So I could go into depth more on this, but I'll continue on in the interest of time. US Bank, for example, strong runner-up in 22 and then took the North American prize in 2023. They had very specific practices documented around assessing application and portfolio health. They talked specifically about how the partnerships with their CXOs work to enable strategic business growth, and some specific cases on their process reengineering, which were very, very compelling. One of the things that I really think US Bank was unique in was that EA increasingly is leading training, at least a portion of onboarding training for all engineers. So if you come into US Bank as a developer, you are exposed to offerings like CertFest, which start to help educate you in why architecture is important. They also are very on top of the project to product dynamics that are going on and impacting many of us in enterprise architecture and in service management more generally. Project to product has been an enormous global movement, and they've done a bunch of other things like putting EA controls and policies in the DevOps pipeline and aligning EA more thoroughly with other governance at the bank. All in all, a very, very compelling presentation. In Europe, we had Schneider Electric. I'm not going to be able to summarize all of these things, but they definitely talked very specifically about their simplification initiatives and how they had gotten to a more rationalized portfolio of products and systems and even policies. Interesting. I just heard the term the other day, policy debt, not from Schneider, but from one of our clients. They were interested in what do we do when policies are created but then never sunset? And they started to call it policy debt, which I thought was just fascinating. I'd never heard the term policy debt before. So, and I think you see this implied here in the Schneider case. And then finally, Union Bank of the Philippines, they really rolled up their sleeves and did a lot of work with the account platform. They are doing a lot with platform engineering, and I will talk specifically about that as one of the leading trends in enterprise architecture. Platform engineering, I think, is something that enterprise architecture and service management should be aware of. I just dropped a blog on it today. And you'll see the graphic from that blog, and I'll talk in depth on that. But Union Bank definitely gets it and understands the importance of platforms to the enterprise architecture priorities. So let's pivot a little bit and talk about some of the data. This is from the Modern Technology Operations Survey that I mentioned. And we ask a couple questions to figure out is architecture real in an organization? If you just ask people, the average survey respondent, does your organization do architecture, or do you have an architecture? I think you get answers that aren't really too helpful or concrete. Because what is an architecture? What does it mean to do architecture? So we ask very specific and targeted questions. For example, in your job classifications as managed by your human resources group, does one or more of those job classifications have the word architect in it? Do you hire technical architects? And when the offer letter goes out, you are being offered a position as a technical architect or a systems architect or a whatever kind of architect, grade level Y, and so on. That's a very tangible question. And we see that very small businesses, maybe not even 30%, have architect titles. Small to medium businesses, you still see kind of a half and half, roughly, mix, allowing for statistical fuzz. And then enterprises, 70% of enterprises will say, yes, we have a job title of architect. And I like this data because it's nice and crunchy and you can see the differences between the segments. I always look real skeptically at any kind of data surveys like this. Probably I would discount some of the VSB. I don't know too many VSBs at all that have architects, but you always get some what we call acquiescence bias in these kinds of surveys. The other question we ask is, do you have an organizational unit with architecture in the name? Enterprise architecture, information architecture, security architecture, data architecture, information architecture. Do you have a unit? And we see answers again that are roughly consistent. Now, this bar chart, it's not really consistent with the last bar chart. You kind of have to look at the different categories, and then you have small, medium, large within the categories. But the VSBs are dark green, the SMBs are medium green, and the dark blues are enterprises. And again, we see 55% of enterprises will say they have an operating unit with architecture in the name, but only, less than 30 of the VSBs will say they have it. Again, I think that there's some acquiescence bias going on here, but definitely we see these more in large enterprises. But here's the sobering issue. We see a clear percentage saying we've never had this type of operating unit on the right. And even more sobering, we see people saying we have had such an operating unit, but no longer do. And we're tracking this very closely because this is the famous architecture pendulum. This is, we spin up architecture and then we get rid of it. I'll talk more about this later. Architecture actually engages with its stakeholder organizations in a variety of ways. Believe it or not, architects take tickets. Now, these aren't mutually exclusive. We see architects being offered as a pool or a bench for long-term assignment. We see architects being distributed out to teams. So this is where architects don't report up through a central group or a central pool at all. Simply, if you're in a line of business, you can hire architects. We also see the notorious Architecture Review Board as an engagement mechanism, and architecture more loosely serving as a design center. Sometimes we see architecture as centralized. Sometimes we see it as more federated, and this is where you have actual distributed architecture units, like a line of business architecture group. We also see architects creating patterns. So it does, I think there is a variety of ways that people experience architecture. Some of the most pain and friction comes around the architecture review board. But the central point here is that there are multiple ways in which you can enable and operationalize architecture. It doesn't all have to go through a central review board. Now, this is the frowny face presentation, or slide here. We've seen this too many times. I am talking every week with architects who are in this situation. They started an architecture program with high expectations. Architecture is going to save the world. And then disillusionment sets in because architecture starts telling people no, or architecture is running around creating pictures and nobody's really clear what the value is. And the program is discontinued. And the architects are either fired or they're distributed out to teams. Maybe they're told you're an engineer now. You're not an architect anymore. And then the systems get more complex. The sprawl happens. The technical debt accrues. And sometimes there's a catastrophe. It's a major security breach, a major systems outage, or people just start feeling straitjacketed. It just gets slower and slower to change the systems. Used to be we could spin stuff up and alter it and adapt it at the speed of business. And now it's just slower and nobody understands why. And people start to say, well, it's because the systems are sprawling and interconnected and interlinked. And 5 years ago, we didn't need to analyze all the dependencies, but now we've got all these dependencies and they're taking place in a wide variety of ways. And so we can't change any one system because they're all locked together because there's no modularization, there's no there's no partitioning, there's no well-defined interfaces between them. And oh, by the way, we're also fighting the fact that 5 years ago we were buying all brand new shiny products. But now we're dealing with the fact that we've got some product and it's got to be sunset. And now we got to do the regression testing, and that's competing for dollars with the new stuff we want to do. And nobody was paying attention to the fact that, yeah, when you buy a technology product from a vendor, it degrades over time, and the vendor then upgrades it and wants more money, and you got to do regression testing. So bottom line is, we see this pendulum. I talk every month to people who are in this pendulum, and when they get to the right, they say, how do we do this right? How do we do this correctly this time around? It's way too wasteful to go through the pendulum. Let's not. Because this is what starts it. You see, this is the caricature. I had, a long conversation with ChatGPT to get it to draw this diagram to my satisfaction. But this is the classic architect running around with a big checklist in his hand. The product team sitting in the background, ignoring him. Got all kinds of diagrams and confusing notations in his head. Nobody knows what he's doing, but he seems to be on a mission. And yet, where's the value? This is the tragedy of the enterprise architect. And yet there is real value there. Architecture has specific business outcomes. And if there is something I am coaching architecture groups on every day, it is articulate the business outcomes. Don't just talk loosely about alignment or agility or efficiency. Get into the cases, get into the details of how. If you have a big sprawling technical portfolio and you are able to start taking out some of that sprawl, you are going to reduce the risk of incidents driven by technical debt. You are on a mission to clean up all of the stuff that is about to just about go out of support. And guess what? Any one product team, it's really not their agenda. They may handle it on a case-by-case basis, but that's not a portfolio strategy. And at scale, you need a portfolio strategy. You need to be able to start saying, look, we've got major product refreshes coming in XYZ relational database and ABC middleware. And then this major, this major operating system is going out of support. And guess what? All of that's going to happen in 15 months. And back of the envelope, it's going to be $20 million in regression testing. That we better start talking to the business now about that because they don't like that kind of imposed cost. And yet, if we don't clean that stuff up, we're going to wind up in aftermarket support or basically running stuff that there is no more patching happening. And the auditors and the regulators are going to come in and say, that is completely unacceptable. You are running unpatched software that is completely out of its maintenance window at the vendors. What are you going to do about that? Architecture pays attention to that and keeps its eye on that ball. And that's business benefit, even if it's the technical portfolio. And this is one of the coaching pieces I'm going through with a lot of architects. It's not technical benefit, it is business benefit because you are reducing risk. And reducing risk, last time I checked, is a business benefit. Same thing with reducing attack risk by reducing the attack surface. Shortening the incident response time. Well, how's EA is doing that? Well, first of all, EA weighs in on design patterns, insists through architecture review that solutions designs include things like load balancing and failover and so forth. And then also, there's a more indirect way that we improve this is by again reducing the sprawl and focusing our IT talent on fewer products so that they get deeper. And now I'm kind of leaping ahead to this minimized tech portfolio to increase employee depth and effectiveness. That has a direct impact on your ability to get things back on the rails when you've got a sub one incident and cascading failures. You know, when those cascading failures involve 12 different flavors of relational database and nobody is particularly good in any of those flavors of relational database, that's a pretty bad day, and it's likely going to be a prolonged incident unless some miracle happens. On the other hand, if it's just a couple flavors or one flavor of relational database, guess what? You got half a dozen people who do nothing but work with that relational database and know all of its quirks and nuances, and they're going to get you back on track a lot quicker. So tell me that again, is that a technical benefit or a business benefit? It is reducing risk. It is creating efficiency in this massive IT spend. It is business benefit. And then ultimately, as enterprise architecture works from left to right here, and this is how we see architects mature, it earns its stripes, it earns its credibilities, it earns a seat at the table. Ultimately, it earns trusted advisor status, and it starts to directly consult on things like revenue and business opportunities. You don't start there. Most architecture groups do not start on the right with, being invited to the table to weigh in on, critical strategic priorities for revenue and mission. But I know of more than one enterprise where architects have earned their way all the way to the right hand here. There's more I could say on this particular slide, and I did have a blog about this topic as well, but it's a centerpiece of one of the reports we've done recently that I'm fairly proud of. As we're looking at making architecture real, and this is directly coming again from the conversations we get into in the awards, as we look at how people actually operationalize architecture, we see that architecture has 8 options. Many organizations start with workflow, architecture review, but that has some bad reputation. It causes friction, it causes delay. Now, I'm never one to say throw a tool out of the toolbox, but we want to supplement architecture review with more higher touch models like consultations and embedding. And yes, those have their pros and cons too, because you get into staffing demand, you get contention for resources there. Creating artifacts and self-service patterns is an important adjunct, and socializing the patterns and all of the EA offerings via a community of interest or guild is key. And this community of interest should not only be architects, it should be everybody who is interested in architecture or impacted by architecture. All the stakeholders who are affected by architecture's activities should be attending the community of interest. architecture, when it's effective, has always been involved in the investment process. And one key variation, which I'll talk in more detail about, is that recently we're seeing a lot of interest in architecture being involved in platform engineering and platform design. I'm going to talk more about that. That's the blog I just published today. And finally, we see the US Bank insight that architecture can and should take ownership of some portion of onboarding and training engineers so that engineers understand that in this organization, we value architecture. This is why it's important. This is why architects do what they do. And if an architect shows up and has some recommendations, this is why. And it just kind of greases the wheel for the conversation rather than an engineer coming in, humming along, and all of a sudden the architect shows up and says, wait a minute, stop. And that's not a good day, for either the architect or the engineer when that happens, and the engineer has no idea that architecture was even a thing in the organization. So let's not do that. We need to let people know that architecture is here, and here's the resources it brings, and here's the value that we're seeking from it. We have both anecdotal and statistical evidence that architecture review is in decline. Like I said, it's a hammer in the toolbox. It's a tool in the toolbox. I'm not going to throw my hammer out just because I'm using it less, but I would like to use it less. And so we see various organizations, they're doing things like raising the bar. One organization, for example, might say, we used to review every program that was $250,000 or more. We've now moved to a protocol in which formal architecture review only happens on programs of $2 million or more. And that was literally a conversation I was in yesterday. So yeah, and that's fine. And I think architecture review should decline. I would highlight that some of the open group, love the open group, dearly good friends of mine, as I look at the open group guidance, I think it tends to center a little too heavily on architecture review as the primary expected operating model. And what I'm trying to say here is that there are other ways to achieve it. We definitely see architecture impacted by project to product. And the way that this plays out is that products are steady state in any event. And so you don't have the project workflow, the project gates and milestones that offer themselves convenient hooks for architects to even weigh in and approve or disapprove. So how do we actually make architecture relevant? And I have thoughts on that. We can embed architects in the product teams, but that's not a silver bullet because there's two problems with this. First of all, do you have enough architects? Now, Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina, and I can share them because they were good enough to participate in the awards and share their case study. They embed one architect on up to 4 teams. Now, this is fractional allocation, and there are reasons to do fractional allocation, but also reasons to be cautious of it. If you're going to do fractional allocation, I like continuity. They should be, even though they're only involved in the team part-time, so in classic Scrum, vernacular, they're involved, not committed. But I still think that they can add a lot of value, but you want it happening over the long term. You don't want them just flying in. And if they're embedding in a team, how do you keep them aligned with architecture principles and values so that they aren't just completely captured by the team and they just become a convenient free resource for the team? So there's no silver bullet with any operating model choices. Love the training. I think I've talked now a couple times about this, but I do think that this is one of the major insights we've gotten from the awards. And it's not just US Bank now. I know of one major European bank that is also following in US Bank's footsteps. Patterns and code. Architects have been doing patterns for a long time. Back in the day, we would do them as UML diagrams. Or worse yet, we would document them in long Word documents. Subject to interpretation, a lot of cognitive load to get through them. And, people argue about it. Well, what do these 2 boxes mean? I see an arrow between these 2 boxes. What does that really mean? I mean, not the best way to document patterns. But wait, now we have infrastructure as code. And although architects may not have the technical skills to go all the way down the rabbit hole with infrastructure as code, I strongly encourage that they should be hands-on, at least with some core fundamentals. Like, can you stand up an AWS virtual machine with a Terraform template? Do you understand how that works? And then have effective conversations with the infrastructure engineers who really know how to make the infrastructure as code work. Because when you're offering somebody a pattern that is documented as code, there's no room for argument. There's no room for interpretation or debate. It is what it is, and you can validate that they have not made changes to that pattern. Now, you want to have a fairly light touch, and they're obviously going to need to enhance that pattern to meet their own needs. But one of the ways that you can actually achieve consistency is by doing this. And so I'm a huge fan of infrastructure as code. And I think that architecture patterns in general should be documented in this way, and not just Terraform, but obviously a complete infrastructure as code and enterprise architecture convergence would include Docker recipes and Hello World application harnesses. Here's your standard, Node.js MongoDB stack documented as a Terraform template, an Ansible playbook, and some sample Node.js code, so on and so forth, all set up in Docker files. And that's one way to do it. There would be other ways. Which brings us to platform engineering, because the patterns, even if they're documented as code, are still just passive resources, and people have to activate them, and they may or may not do that correctly. But platform engineering, and we only have a little bit of time, is the idea that no, it's not just a pattern, it's an operational service. Yay, service management. It is in a service catalog, and maybe it's in a developer portal, which is just a specialized service catalog for the developers. Lisa, you all should look at the developer portal conversation, Spotify Backstage, Harness, stuff like that. I think it's a really interesting variation on service management, service catalog. So the platform really, I think this awesome way forward between the twin evils of sprawl and technical debt leading to breaches and outages versus the bureaucracy and delay of the old school architecture and security reviews. When you look at those two worlds and say, well, I don't want the world on the left and I don't want the world on the right, been there, done that, got those t-shirts and those battle scars. Really what we wind up with is saying, look, we've got to start reducing the variation and sprawl proactively. And we're going to do this by standing up 2 or 3 standard platforms. And guess what? If this seems like full circle for some of the old timers out there, you got it. Because what was the original opinionated platform? The mainframe. Now, we're going to have more options now. It's like we got a standard Node.js stack, a standard Java stack, standard Python stack, standard cloud stack, standard on-prem stack. Gen AI, we're still going to build our own stacks for a while, but then we'll start to commoditize those. But I mean, this is still better than the bad old days when you were running around trying to, figure out which flavor of database you were going to use, what flavor of server you were going to use, which operating system you were going to use, what application, design, what monitoring you were going to use, what your resilience and failover strategies were, what your DevOps pipeline was. I mean, all of that engineering and architecture, that's why we wound up with 50-page architecture checklists. You go to platform engineering, and 45 of those 50 pages just go back into the platform. Because guess what? We didn't need those big checklists back in the day on the mainframe. We'd already settled what data persistence looked like and what transactional integrity and scheduling and monitoring looked like. We knew what that would look like on the mainframe. And now we're headed back there. And the reason it's a good thing is because it frees up our developers to focus on really value-add products. And if this sounds like a blast from the past and kind of old school, I'll simply point you all to Spotify and Netflix. Netflix has talked about the paved road strategy, and they realize that they need paved roads for their developers, and those paved roads are platforms. The reason that Spotify created Backstage is because they were seeing too much sprawl and variation in developer choices. So In a lot of ways, what's old is new, and yet what's new is still new, and it is not the bad old days of the completely controlled mainframe where you couldn't do anything. We still have options. We still can go on the gravel road if we need to. But in general, if we don't need to, let's stay on this highway here. Finally, just kind of closing out here, and we'll have some conversation, I hope. I see some chat here. Many of our organizations we talk to performing application health assessments to identify technical debt. This is absolutely a thing. A lot of concern about, again, portfolio sprawl, and that gateways into the conversations around quantifying technical debt. It's so funny. People talk about technical debt like it's an established, GAAP standard, like, oh, it must be quantified by some accounting standards body. It's not. It's a metaphor. Lord Cunningham coined it in 1991, and now everybody thinks that there's precise formulas, and there aren't. We're working on some stuff here at Forrester. It starts with looking at the data that you have available. And just in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into a super amount of detail on this, but we're definitely seeing a lot of convergence. Those who know me know that I've been talking about ERP for a long time, ERP for IT for a long time. We're closer now than we ever have been. I mean, it was a pretty clear signal to the market when Bill McDermott went from SAP to ServiceNow. And that's now really starting to play out in real world ways where people are aggregating more and more of all of this data together and getting to a point where they have much greater strategic insight into these big sprawling IT portfolios and can make better decisions on an ongoing basis, decisions that are data driven and increasingly informed and influenced by AI capabilities. So more on this one to come. I'll close with some words on the awards. If you are interested in the awards, we encourage an attitude that you're doing it to give back to the community. Please get clear with your corporate communications. This is a very sad situation when people go into the awards and they're looking great, and all of a sudden, oh, I got to pull out because corporate comms didn't know I was doing this. No, don't go there. Don't be that person. Be specific and quantified. We're not able to fund winter travel, but we are able to fund hotel and registration. And you don't need to be a Forrester customer. No, you don't. And we encourage winners and runners up to attend open group events, which are going to provide opportunity for more detailed case presentations. You will meet leading architects at the open group events. Absolutely. And we'll propose a write-up. We'll work with your corporate comms group to make sure that it's on point and a useful reflection of your corporate brand. I mean, this is not any kind of gotcha, thing. And everybody, just say, people didn't take me up on this, but it offer still stands, a free Forrester inquiry to, talk about your submission strengths and weaknesses. It's not a business. I'm not, I'm not doing business development in these inquiries. I'm honestly, offering my genuine insights into whatever you presented. So for what that's worth. And with that, I will bring my actual presentation to a close here. I'm going to stop sharing. I see that we do have some chat here. Hopefully it's yeah, some nice conversation. I got at least one good question here. Lisa, why don't I could boot it over to you. And you're on mute.
Listen, $10 for the Mexico jar. Because I didn't say it at the beginning, we have carved out time for Q&A. And today, Charlie, you win the award so far this year for carving out the most time for Q&A. So thank you very much. So feel free, please. It's a pretty unique opportunity to have Charlie here. So, feel free, please, to ask any questions that you would like, really kind of about any topic, because Charlie is pretty all-knowing. But Anthony is asking, can you touch on the value of modeling tools that embedded application portfolio management, LeanIX, Snow, ServiceNow, APM, Orbis, etc. And how much is Gen AI used in developing, that's a great question, architectural artifacts? Thank you for that great question, Anthony.
Yeah, this is a really, really good question, Anthony. So first of all, modeling tools like LeanIX and Orbis definitely are modeling tools. I don't see as much modeling done in ServiceNow. But that's one of the trends, and you're absolutely spot on that what used to be a tool to create diagrams is increasingly becoming an aggregation point for information. And LeanIX has very robust application portfolio management capabilities. And you need those somewhere. And typically, what we often see is an interesting relationship between, and I'm just going to share my notorious master deck here. We're all hopefully among friends, and the here, hang on, where did Zoom go? I'm sorry, just give me a second here. Okay, perfect. I have it.
Well done, you. Zoom can be tricky. It likes
No,
to
no,
hide.
I've got three monitors here, and I've got a slide with a whole bunch. I've got a deck with 1,000+ slides in it. So I'm just wanting to make sure I get okay. So let's okay. Are you seeing a slide with CMDB versus EA, Lisa?
Yes, sir, we are.
Okay.
Oh, I've
So
seen this slide.
yeah. So something that everyone needs to figure out, or most organizations need to figure out, is the relationship between CMDB versus the enterprise architecture tool. In the enterprise architecture tool, we have planning views. We have business capabilities that historically have not been in CMDBs, but increasingly are showing up in at least the ServiceNow CMDB. Not sure that BMC or Ivanti are getting there. You also have end-to-end business processes, value streams. You tend to have more logical views of things. You have views that you really don't need under change control, not under strict change control anyways. It's more it's a workbench. And then you have your shared data of applications, services, if you distinguish them from applications, and technology products, which you had ought to distinguish from applications and services. And then, of course, you have assets, which some people will throw those early maturity people will throw the assets into the EA tool and realize very quickly that the EA tool is in no way or shape or form able to handle a large asset portfolio. It's not meant for that. But you have to figure out these questions here. You need to, on the EA side, it's not production class. I mean, they're getting better, but it's not an auditable data set. It's the creative front end. It's the design time view. Do you want a rigorous change control process? In general, you don't when you're in design time. You need the flexibility to design and redesign. You also wind up with a lot of extended attributes in the application portfolio. The CMDB, in big shops, the auditors look at this. And so my personal experience was we had the same thing going on. Our application portfolio tool, when I was doing this at real scale, was a home-built thing, but it was similar to what LeanIX might do today. The CMDB had 12 attributes for the application. It had the major ones, like the support team, the business definition, a few other things. The application inventory had dozens of extended attributes that the data quality varied, but we used them at various times for managing initiatives, and there was business value in that. So this is, I think, the central problem, Anthony, that we get to with figuring out, where is, what's our point of view on CMDB versus EA. Now, ServiceNow, I will say, is definitely doing more and more with enterprise architecture. They've been moving this direction. They don't have, to my knowledge, a full diagramming capability yet. They have a partner called Inspy that is, I think, built on the Now platform that gives you the diagramming. But I don't know much about it. And that's, I think, where that's going. And I think the other CMDVs out there, because of course, there are other valid vendors here, you're still in this situation of having to figure out the interface. So that's what I would say about that. Now, the other part of the question was, where are we going with Gen AI in the enterprise architecture space? And I have a working slide on that as well.
Oh,
If
yay.
if the Zoom would get out of my way here. This is
Well, Charlie's looking for it. I will say that our May webinar is Mark Hinkle, who is a real thought leader in AI, and he is putting together a special presentation for us because we've seen some presentations coming from IT service management talking about AI, but Mark's putting together for me an AI presentation called "How AI Has, Is, and Will Impact Service Management," and that's next month's webinar. Look
perfect.
at us coordinate.
Yep, yep, absolutely. Now, this is a little outdated. This is 3 months old, and so it's therefore outdated. And probably if there's any vendors on the line here, they might like, hey, I'm with one of those vendors and we're doing stuff and you're not showing me. So I'm apologize for that. But in general, these are still early days. We are seeing, for example, natural language query and summarization of repository artifacts. I mean, that's a good starting point. It's low-hanging fruit. I would say in general, to specifically answer Anthony's question, no, we are not seeing yet a lot of Gen AI developing artifacts. We see some interesting proofs of concept. For example, I asked ChatGPT to create a UML sequence diagram representing retrieval augmented generation, which is one of the major design patterns in Gen AI. And it gave me a Mermaid UML syntax diagram and created this. I mean, Gen AI created these boxes and lines. It did not draw them. It created them as this syntax here that you see on the left, and there's more to it than that. That's just the top of it. And then also I fed this, and I'm sorry it's so blurry. I fed this into ChatGPT and asked it to analyze it. And it gave me an analysis that was somewhat on target and had some inaccuracies. But this is early days. I mean, you throw an architecture diagram in 2 years, I think we'll throw an architecture diagram in and it'll be able to give us, a decent analysis and it will be able to create non-trivial architecture diagrams as outputs. The trouble is that you still need to validate this stuff as a human being. I've been doing a lot with creating a VBA, some Excel, just basic Excel spreadsheet programming. And ChatGPT has been immensely helpful with helping me define my Visual Basic, and yet it gets it wrong in places. I have to test, I have to know what I want, I have to use a very precise language in describing the problem to ChatGPT. If I'm imprecise in my terminology, it'll give me what I ask for, just like a computer. So, it's like the more things change, the more they stay the same. Anyways, I kind of went in depth there. Did we get any other questions coming in?
We do have a few more questions, and well, let me ask them. So, and this is a very unfair question, Charlie. I understand that, and I know that you've written blogs about this, but there sort of has been a rise and a fall and a rise and a fall, and we're back to a rise of EA. Do you
Yep,
feel like that's a pretty fair statement? What
absolutely.
in a single
The pendulum,
sentence?
I did a whole slide on the pendulum.
Exactly, that's so true. That is so true. In a single sentence, the value that paying attention to enterprise architecture, even if you're not US Bank and you're not going to submit, in one sentence, why? What's in it for me? Sorry.
No, it's all right. Um, it starts with controlling the real business risk of sprawl and technical debt. in your IT spend and the cascading, sorry, it's going to be a long sentence, the cascading risks that come from that.
Okay, that's not such a long sentence. And
A lot of
then
my,
my,
a lot of my, go ahead, sorry.
no, you go, please.
A lot of my EA colleagues, they tend to focus on business architecture. They kind of feel like they're not adding value unless they're doing a lot of capability mapping, value stream analysis. All that's useful and important, and it helps contextualize. But if you really want to start, yeah, I'm talking more to the EA practitioner. If you are starting from the basics with people who are questioning your fundamental value and why we would even do EA here. Well, here's my nutshell. It's the value proposition in a nutshell is making sure we get the expensive to change decisions right.
Oh, that's great. May I quote you on that? Because I will
Yeah.
be.
Well, it's a Martin Fowler thing or somebody came up with it. But yeah, architecture, there's all these academic ivory tower definitions of architecture, but I simply like that it's architecture is about getting the expensive to change IT decisions correct as much
So,
as you can with limited information and under time pressures.
mhm, that's a great answer. And then
Somebody's got to be focused on that.
my final question, this one's not actually mine, but the final question is, um, can you give us, we have 4 minutes, can you give us, please, your favorite story of an organization that had the aha moment? If we have all these components together, we just need to change the way we look at it, maybe, or as opposed to somebody who just said, "Oh gosh, we're not doing," because everyone's doing enterprise architecture at some level. They're just not calling it that, perhaps. But what's your favorite story of a an organization that said, "Oh gosh, if we do this, we'll get that"?
So the teachable moment for one of the larger banks in this country was the realization at the board level that the customer had to update their address in 10 different places. You know,
Right.
you move and you had to update mortgage and you had to update consumer lending and you had to update retail savings. And if you were in wealth management, you had to update wealth management. That was the teachable moment. And I think it was because probably members of the board were actually customers of the bank. And they were like, if this is how we're treating our customers, we have a big problem.
Yeah.
And so they embarked on a customer master data and a program. And the trouble is that this bank had, dozens of P&Ls. And so you had to figure out a federated control mechanism so that people weren't continually remastering customer data. You had to put the controls in place. And architecture is how you do that kind of a thing. There is no other way to do that kind of a thing that I am aware of. IT strategic planning, no, it doesn't have the ongoing, stewardship perspective that architecture has. And
I think
so, yeah,
I'm sorry, I was just going to say,
that was the teachable moment for this particular institution.
I think when I read about things like that, challenges that have been overcome by financial institutions, those focuses are very much, and maybe this is the bubble I live in, but they're very much on the customer journey, the design thinking, that one component of it, which is how it's a key component to how things like that are built, but it's the architecture that is going to support and enable that long term. And that probably frustrates you because I know you talk about that a lot. So I think it's really interesting that it's kind of, it's the holistic backbone of so much. And that's why I was excited to bring you in today to hear your presentation, to see the statistics I knew you were going to share. And I'm hopeful that, if we'll put in the link, and I think I put it in the chat already, here's how you submit, but I also put Charlie on LinkedIn. Just feel free to connect with him directly. And,
Yes.
if this isn't a thing for you and your organization, please feel free to socialize it, because it's a great opportunity for organizations and the people inside those organizations that have been working hard to improve things so that we don't have to change our address in 19 places anymore.
Exactly. All
Right. On
right.
that note, top of the hour. Thank
Great.
you so much, Charlie.
My
I'm going to
pleasure.
give you a quick call because I have a knot about this question for you. And then, as I said, guys, next May the third, there's May the 16th, Mark Kinkle, who is a thought leader in AI, is coming in to do that presentation, how it is, has, is, and will impacting our service management programs. And I believe it's going to be a very valuable session for us all, as today was. So thank you very much, Charlie. Thank you for all of you guys who came in to join us. And hopefully we'll see you all next month.